Hello. Welcome to episode 138. This episode is all. Sorry about that. I had a bit of background noise there. Cilium Gateway API use cases. And I am very excited to welcome Christine. Hi, Christine. How are you today?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing not too bad. It's a nice, beautiful Friday. Can't complain.
Yes, absolutely. Would you like to introduce yourself to our watchers, please?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Christine. I work in the community side of Isovalent. I have a focus around service meshes and gateway API. So I like to dabble around, edge of the clusters and, north, south, east, west, every single direction, all the cardinal directions.
Excellent. Cool. So as I mentioned, today's topic is going to be around Cilium Gateway API use cases. But before we kind of kick that off, as always, just kind of a quick update in terms of what's happening in the cloud native space. Deadlines are looming. So there are a lot of CFPs that are closing in the coming days. A lot of the Kubernetes community days are going to be closing very shortly. So Washington, D.C. closes on the 2nd of June, which is 2-3 days away. Same with the one in the UK. KubeCon, always looming in the background.
How is it always there every single time?
It's always there. And like when it finishes, another one pops up. It just can't be ended. June the 9th, Austria, June 22nd. So huge amounts of CFPs that are closing in the coming days. The co-located events at KubeCon, they're going to be closing a couple of weeks after the KubeCon main event closes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a little bit of something special to kind of allude to as well in terms of events that are up and coming, which is eBPF Summit 2024. Rumor is that that's going to be reappearing again soon as well. So anybody who has ideas, thoughts about what they would like to talk to all around eBPF use cases, projects that you have that you've been working on, we are looking forward to hearing from the community what they're doing, what you're up to with eBPF. That's why we're here. So a lot of things to kind of be aware of at the moment, things that are up and coming. So with that, I think it's time for us to talk about Gateway API.
Cool. Also, I think there's like the Kubernetes 10-year or like 10th birthday that is also coming up. I remember seeing that floating around on the interweb. So that could be something that you're interested if it's happening in your local city.
Absolutely. 10 years old. That's pretty bonkers.
6 more years, and then they can drive a car in Canada at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Soon, eventually, like those job applications where you need 20 years experience in Kubernetes will actually
make sense.
Yeah, finally. We will get there. 10 years. Cool. Right. Gateway API. Shall I hand it over to you?
Right? Sounds good.
Awesome. By the way, sorry, for people that are watching, if you have any questions, we, as always, would love to hear from you. Put your questions in, say hello. All right, with that.
All right, cool. Hope everyone can see my screen. All right, but today we're going to be talking about some Gateway API use cases in Cilium, and then I think I'd like to talk more about like how Gateway API's conformance works because I've contributed to the project a bit. So I just like want to clarify some of the use cases around that and like how people know. So the Gateway API version 1.1 was released a few weeks ago, and there's this nice blog post which talks about all like the latest, what's new, what's graduated to standard, which is pretty exciting. So the links I'll shove the links in the show notes afterwards, but there's a lot of new exciting stuff that's happening here. So if you want to catch up with the latest, I would recommend going to this Kubernetes blog. And now I have like the simple setup because I'm going to be showing some use cases, I guess, of what happens when you use Gateway API. So I have like a simple kind cluster. no Q proxy enabled, because in order to use Gateway API, Cilium's Gateway API implementation, you need to have the Q proxy replacement happening, and you also have to have the standard channel CRDs for Gateway API. So that's all documented online as well in our Cilium docs. So like it talks about the prereqs.
Just for people who are coming new to this, I suppose there's a couple of quick questions in terms of, can you kind of elaborate a little bit in terms of, well, a few things, I suppose. What is Gateway API for people who've not come across it for the first time?
Yeah, for sure. So I do believe that Nico made like another echo stream a few months ago, maybe just under a year ago, that talks more in depth about Gateway API. But if you're not familiar with it, Gateway API is the next level Ingress. So Ingress is now not going to be adopting any new features. It's going to be there because they're not going to rip it out of the Kubernetes API. But now we have Gateway API, what does, and that is supposed to be more like load balancing, service mesh, generic, expressive, and role-oriented. And something that is notably different around the Gateway API is like the division of roles. So now we have your infrastructure providers, and those are like your cloud providers, for example, like Google Cloud or Azure. And then you also have your cluster operators. So those are like the infrastructure people who actually have load, like spin up and dedicate, like tell the infrastructure providers what resources they need. And then your application developers handles routes. So that's going to be something that's kind of like, there's a divided line, and you don't have to have so much back and forth between your cluster operators and your application developers. And so the Gateway API is so like L4 to L7 routing in Kubernetes pretty much.
So this, I guess, is dividing up responsibilities. So I guess prior to this, somebody had to define a service and attach it to something or other.
Yeah.
That individual had to kind of deal with a lot of different layers that may be out of their knowledge space to a certain degree. Whereas this,
exactly,
on the bits that matter to them.
Yeah. So like, of course, like just as you said, application developers now, they don't have to know what's happening like more at the lower infrastructure level side of things, because you would see like developers and like adopting Kubernetes is like a big step. And then also trying to handle traffic into your clusters was like a nightmare on top of that. So this actually kind of divides it a little bit nicer, so the application developers can focus on what they're developing, and then the cluster operators can handle the infrastructure of the cloud operations, on-prem, whatever you have.
Yeah.
And it just makes it a lot more cleaner.
Okay. Let's people focus on the things that matter to them then, really, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. I apologize in advance.
Oh, no. Please.
One last question here. You mentioned enabling Q proxy replacement. For people who are not aware of that, what is that?
Yeah, so for the Q proxy replacement, so instead of using the default Q proxy that comes with Kubernetes, Cilium can also replace that for a more efficient way, because Cilium, built on eBPF, doesn't leverage the IP tables because all that chain of mess. Instead, we use
chain of mess.
Yeah, just I remember like seeing some slides, I think earlier this week. It was like, oh, if you go through this flow and you match, and then you matched on this one, you just have to continue going down. So literally a whole chain of events happening.
Yeah.
So instead of leveraging that, you can use Cilium. And so Cilium Service Mesh, you do need to enable Q proxy replacement by default. So there's like other use cases within Cilium that doesn't require you to rip out the Q proxy if you don't feel comfortable doing so. But for certain use cases, like for example, Gateway API, you need to leverage that.
Cool. Thank you very much.
No, good questions. Keep them coming.
Okay.
Keeps me humble. All right. So here is a simple command that you can install if you have like a sandbox cluster, as I do. So yes, we replace the Q proxy replacement to true. We enable the Gateway API to true. And then after that happens, you should have your Cilium installation with Gateway API. I do have to say though, like remember to install the standard channel CRDs for Gateway API first. they don't come out of the box. This is across all implementations. This is so like people can have the necessary CRDs in their cluster and not like have so many just floating around in their environment. So yeah, so this is the diagram that we saw earlier where we have the infrastructure provider, so your gateway class. And so Cilium has a gateway class, and we can see it here. So right now I just have my cluster and then K9s because everyone likes a nice display. So if you just look at your gateway class, so this is what I have, and whenever I install Cilium with Helm, and everything is like up to date and looking good, this is what you get. And so you can see like we have our Cilium gateway class, and the controller name is the io.cilium/gateway controller. So that's how you refer to it in your gateway object. So that is that's the top part here of the gateway class. And then you have your cluster operators leveraging the gateway. So we can see what that looks like as well. Gateway. So right now I just have a gateway that's running in the default namespace called Cilium because I'm so original. And you can see that it has successfully listeners have attached, so that means that there's something on the other side that's listening to this gateway. It's accepting traffic from this IP address that I've had set up, and then I'm like port forwarding it on my machine just locally. Let me see if I can see anything in the YAML that's more noteworthy. I guess something that is kind of important to see here is like you can see listeners are allowing routes, so like any HTTP route, TLS route, etc., from any namespaces. So that means like anything can attach to it, but you can specify that, of course. So yeah, this is what the gateway class.
Could you pop back to the YAML? There was something that peaked right down at the bottom. I think it listed supported kinds. I've not noticed that before. So that you can define in your gateway what specific route types can be applied to it.
Yeah, because there's various routes, and I think they're trying to make it more like, you have to be very explicit about what you're listening to.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, so that is what kind of a gateway looks like. And yeah, and then you have your HTTP route, so we can take a peek at one of those as well. So right now I just have here, let's look at the YAML instead. Actually, you know what, instead of all the annotations, it's fine actually, people understand this. So we have like an HTTP route, and right now I have like the simple setup of two services, so like version 1, version 2 of example app, and I'm just like dividing traffic around them. But you can see that we have our parent ref, which is referring to our gateway Cilium that was in the default namespace. So that's how we refer to what gateway you want to interact with. And so that's like, as an application developer, that's really all I have to know. I just have to talk to the cluster operator and be like, okay, what's the namespace? Give it to me. I can just throw it in my YAML. And then the backend refs that we care about here are listed under the rules. So you can see that we have matching on path prefix of get. So that means like anything with get, we're allowing to go to these backend refs of these services, and they're weighted equally between version 1 and version 2 right now. So yeah, so it's kind of like very intuitive. It makes sense. And like
in terms of where it says kind, so service is one kind, could you go direct to a pod or?
Yeah, so like, you know how services is kind of like half of the pod, because pods are ephemeral, they spin up and down, and so you're gonna need services in order to keep track of all the pods that are going up and down and deleting. So it's directing it to the service of that sits in front of your pods. So that's how it handles that.
String, where it says backend ref kind being of type service, whether there's different kinds that you may be aware of, or
I think there might be some different use cases, but I do not know off the top of my head.
that's fine.
We could take a look at the documentation later though.
Good.
We have
No worries.
time. All right, cool. So of course, just want to put it out there. There's some standard resources, but there's also experimental resources as of version 1.1. So of course, it's listed all on the blog. But gateway class, gateway, those are like, I think in the standard channel since like 0.5 or something like that. So a while ago. HTTP route, gRPC route, and reference grants are all in the standard channel as well. I think gRPC route was just moved to standard channel, I want to say recently, and reference grants as well. And then experimental is CCP route, UDP route, TLS route. So this is in the gateway API. And so also, I would say to note that Cilium also lists out which resources we support, because the gateway API, they have like conformance tests, and then based on these conformance tests, providers list out what they support. So we can like go and see what Cilium supports. So for example, we go to 1.1, Cilium, and you can see like the supported features are all listed out here, for example. So it's like, I don't think people really poke around in this. Sorry, this is very not zoomed in. People don't really poke around this pathway under the gateway API, but if you are curious to see what other supported features that your implementation or Cilium's implementation has, then you can check it out here. Yeah.
Cool. I've got a quick comment here, which I think could probably lead into a question. So Joseph Ligier, if I'm pronouncing that right, apologies if I'm not. I didn't know about GWCTL or GW Cuddle or whatever.
Yeah, Gateway Cuddle is like a better way to view your policies. I think I haven't used it that much, to be honest, because I think it was in its own separate repo, and then it was merged into the Gateway API repo, and then but it's supposed to be like better at managing your policies, and you can like interact, for example, get policies. So you have like a timeout policy, retry policy, and so it's just like a easier way to interact with them.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I think that's like a little tidbit, that another thing that people don't know about the Gateway API on top of everything else.
Yeah, no, but this is useful kind of information, isn't it? I suppose you're trying to debug stuff, and like all these tools are hopefully kind of appearing to make people's lives a bit easier.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so yeah, Gateway Cuddle, I would say check it out. I think it's still kind of youngish as well, so they would appreciate any feedback and any use cases that end users would like to see, or how they could provide better outputs, for sure. So starting off simple, some use cases. Now we're getting into like the use cases of the Gateway API. So for example, if you have a website and you want to curl to your backend app, you have your Gateway API, which matches on your HTTP route, and it maps over to your service, which then maps over to your application. So that sounds like a lot, but I promise it's not. So if you, for example, what do I have in here? Let's see. So for example, okay, well, let's just delete this line because we don't need it. You have your HTTP route here. This is like the more not so bloated version as what we were looking at before, because this is just in the YAML that you can apply. So you have your parent ref of Cilium, and then your backend ref. So that is what's configuring the bridge between your gateway like your gateway at the load balancer and then to your service. And then if we look at a gateway, so this is Cilium's as well. So this is also what we saw earlier of the Cilium gateway just being provisioned, and then the listeners. So we're just giving this listener name of HTTP. The protocol is HTTP. We're listening on port 80, and we're allowing from all namespaces to be attached to this gateway resource. So that is like the first use case. It's like the most basic, simple one that you can get started off. If you need more of like a walkthrough, it's like all listed out here, and it's a lot more detailed if you have the time to read, but it provides good like reasoning and how the underlying mechanics work. So that is the first part. So you might be wondering, like, how does Cilium actually handle this? So the gateway API, because we have the Cilium operator and the Cilium agent, so the operator, the agent is running on every single node. It watches for the resources, make sure it's valid, and then once that's all clears and checks out, then you get Cilium Envoy config resources. So, oops. Spelling. Envoy. Not that. Okay, let's look at the CIDs that we had. Yeah, so we got our Cilium Envoy configs that's generated on your behalf through the Cilium agent / operator. So that's how Cilium does it under the hood. So you don't really have to like worry about it as long as like your routes and your gateway are like valid and doesn't like make sense logically, then like Cilium will handle it for you under the hood, which is really nice to know. Something else that you can do is like traffic splitting. So that's like another basic use case that people have been using it in the ecosystem. So for example, if you want to split like 75%, 25% between two versions, you can. Right now, I just have it splitting 50-50, as you saw earlier in the YAML that I had. So in this pane here, I was curling my sample app a bunch. And then I'm also running a Hubble UI also locally, so we can like see it in a kind of visual manner if that's more of your style. So you can see all like the curls that we have here. And so if we're zooming out a little bit, this is our default namespace. Our ingress this is just like the ingress into your cluster. It's hitting these two apps here, or your two pods. And then you can see that we have version 2 here. And then because it's 50-50, hopefully we'll find version 1 somewhere. Somewhere, anywhere. Version 1. What a nice 50-50 split there between. But yeah, so you can see that in Hubble that you can see traffic flow. So it's kind of nice that you can leverage the Hubble side of things with the Gateway API just to like see where your traffic's flowing. And I don't know, like I've worked at companies where they really cared about metrics, but then the people who are looking at the metrics don't really understand it or like the numbers. So showing something visual like this can help map out some of the resources for sure, and provide, just something.
I always find showing people Hubble for like the first time and it like drawing all of the lines between everything, it makes it so much easier to understand like the architecture of what actually things look like inside your cluster.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I remember like showing a friend some Hubble flows, and I think it was just like the ones that continuously output the flow, and they're like I think my brightness was up too much or something, but you can see like I toned down my terminal a lot, so like the colors are nice, Make sure you stare away from your screen for 30 seconds every once in a while, etc. So, but you can see like version 1, version 2 being hit on the sides there. So that's some nice. We get both the visual and the CLI if you care for it.
Catered for everybody, I think, at that point.
Yeah, for sure. So those are some simple use cases that we have. There's also other ones that you can try out. So we have like HTTPS. There's a walkthrough in the docs for like on the website as well. I'm like not going to go through every single one because I think people should also like have a little bit of friction of trying out our implementation. And if like the docs are not as seamless as it can be, please leave feedback in the GitHub repo. Like we appreciate anything that will help us in the future, of course.
Yeah.
So there are some examples at the bottom. So this is like dipping your toe in
I suppose
the Gateway API.
Pretty much by law have to mention that, like, if you go to Cilium.io, there are labs on there.
Oh yes.
Yep, where there are Gateway API labs for you to actually play with Cilium. So you don't even need to deploy anything yourself if you don't want to. You can basically do
what the heck am I doing? I went the hard way. I should have done that. Oh my goodness.
Is that waiting for you?
Yeah, so there's some examples here. So you can see like HTTPS example, traffic splitting is like kind of just what we went through. And then a header modifier example, which is another cool use case if you like want to edit some headers incoming to your cluster. So yeah, that is like a little sampler of Gateway API with Cilium.
Excellent. Yeah, so I mean, I've got a couple of questions really about Gateway API to a certain degree as a whole. You kind of covered most of the routes. There was so like the TCP and UDP routes, which are still in beta at the moment. Is there any ETA? Are they going to replace, I guess, load balancers, or is it, kind of what's the plan there?
ETA wise, it's kind of up in the air because it's like such a large and fast moving project with a lot of use cases popping up. Hopefully in the next few upcoming minor releases, maybe it'll show up. And then the second part of your question of, is it going to replace load balancing? Again, like you don't have to rip out everything just because there's something new in the ecosystem. Like unless some implementation is going to drop and like delete everything, everything should still be usable. So, I want to emphasize that you don't have to adopt everything. But there will be load balancing use cases that you can use with this if you're so interested in it.
Cool. Big question. Is it ready for production use?
What a nice question. I think if you are comfortable with it, if your team's comfortable with it, the standard channels are pretty like tried and tested. I know that a lot of the large cloud providers do have like their gateway controllers are easily usable for like maybe like over a year. So like that's pretty tried and tested. And then just make sure that the implementation that you select. So for example, like Cilium does support the standard gateway resources, HTTP resources. I think if you feel comfortable and your team feels comfortable, then I would say why not? But of course, that depends on your use case and everyone's comfort level.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, for people who are wanting to get involved with Gateway API, we briefly talked about, you can use the labs if you want to play with Gateway API for the first time. How do you get involved with the project itself? You have ideas or you want to submit problems, things like that?
I think one easy way is to look at the issues and get involved either through picking up an issue or like commenting on an issue. There's a lot that people have been reporting, and so like any reports of bugs have always been useful and stuff like that. If you don't want to be involved on GitHub, you can also go to the Slack channel and Kubernetes. They're really active there, and people are joining at a steady rate. So it's still like quite like small enough that it's not intimidating to ask a question or get help on something. So I think those are like the two main avenues that you can try if you are more on the lurker side and want to get involved. If you want to be like more engaged with it too, though, and you like talking, there's also the Gateway API meetings, which are held Mondays, and then I think that's somewhere on like the website, the Kubernetes SIG's website of like
Yep.
when all the meetings are happening. So if you want to be more engaged, and they also like having end users as well, who like they want to hear your use cases or your trials that you've had with Gateway API. So they're very receptive. You don't have to like contribute, like go deep into the code. You can
Yep.
also help out with just, hammering out, smoothing out the edges pretty much.
Cool. Yeah, and I suppose if you are at KubeCon as well, the SIG Networking and SIG Networking Gateway API maintainer tracks and sessions. You'll probably be able to find Christine. You'll be able to find Nick and others, and have thoughts and kind of express ideas that you may have, and hopefully kind of move the project forward.
Yeah.
Cool. Final question. Kind of from your perspective, I suppose, what's the future for Gateway API? Kind of, what's kind of coming next?
I think something that is really exciting that's happening is the Gamma initiative in Gateway API. So if you're not familiar with Gamma, it's kind of like the service mesh. What's it called? Gamma stands for Gateway API for Mesh Management and Administration. So that's quite a mouthful, but this just graduated to standard channel in version 1.1. So it's been under the works, and a lot of maintainers from various service mesh projects have been engaged on this. I think this is something that instead of like describing the north-south traffic, it's the east-west of like the mesh, and using your HTTP routes being able to refer to each other instead of like having to stick to one service mesh and then be forever landlocked in there. So I think this will help alleviate a lot of the burden of switching between hopefully service meshes, or just like making it more like having some sort of specs for service mesh, because everything has been different for a long time. That I've seen people be very confused about how different implementations and switching over from implementations to each other has been a nightmare for them. So I'm very excited for Gamma just as a whole.
Cool. One other thing, and this is kind of relevant to some of the work that you've been doing, is prior to Gateway API, everybody was typically using the ingress objects within Kubernetes clusters, and people still are. But as you mentioned, your kind of work is going to slow down on the ingress side of things as people move to Gateway API objects, gateways, and HTTP routes and things like that. What is there to help people? So this is the ingress type that exists within upstream stable Kubernetes objects. Is it going to be big? Is it going to be a big uplift? Are people going to have to do? Is there any tooling out there to help people move and things like that?
Yeah,
for sure. So well right now.
I know, the perfect volley. So yes, so the ingress. I think ingress is now frozen. New features being added to Gateway API. So if you are interested in trying out, like you have your ingress resources, but then you don't want to necessarily change it over, or you don't know how to change it over, there's this nice tooling under the Kubernetes SIGs group called Ingress to Gateway. And it's another tool that can help you translate your ingress resources to gateway resources. So it spits out the gateway and then the HTTP route, for example. So that's like the command that you literally just use. It's at this project link here. And of course, this is still like more for a sandbox environment. So don't shove it into production and then hope everything will work out, right? But this is like a good way to see how, like, tease out the information that you're going to need to put into your HTTP route if you need to like make it more, I don't know, robust or something like that. But yeah, huge disclaimer, like this is not for production use. Don't just do it on a whammy. But it's a very cool tool though.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So, fantastic. Again, more useful tooling that may not have come across. It's actually going to help you, kind of move over to Gateway API. Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up everything. I want to say thank you very much for Christine for joining the call today and giving us an overview of not only Gateway API, but how Gateway AI is implemented through Cilium. I want to say thank you to everybody that joined, including, pop this up here, some of the lab champions that are actually about today as well. So congratulations to the people who have completed, I think, all of the labs in order to become a lab champion. So
wow.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, and thank you very much. So yeah, kind of wrapping up, as I kind of mentioned, eBPF Summit 2024 is in the works. So if you have ideas and things that you'd like to see as part of eBPF Summit, yeah, we would love to hear from you. You can find us on the Slack channels. Yeah, so it's a goodbye from me. Presumably
it's goodbye for me too.
Yeah,
I can't continue hosting this without you.
So yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you, everybody.
Happy Friday.